Now for the swings block, there are actually two blocks that we're making. Block 2A is going to end up being 18.5 by 8.5, and we're going to create that by joining our two pieces of background. So I've got my light background here and the one that they call trinkets design. So that was my fabrics 5 and 38. And these are the 8.5 by 9.5 pieces that we cut in the first video. And we're just going to join those with a 1/4 inch seam. Then we're going to press that seam open. And that will make our background for block 2A. And for block 2B, it's our whole piece that's 12.5 by 8.5. So that's my long side there. So I'm going to be sewing down this short side here. It's just a case of lining up the edges and sewing with the 1/4 inch seam. So just open that seam up. I'm doing this because we're going to have the applique on top and it's going to add to the bulk and thickness. And we don't need this seam to be one way or the other to line up with a piece that's going to be next to. Now before we trace any applique onto our fusible web, we're going to sew the pairs of fabrics together in their colourways. And if we put this on here, you can see that if I join these two small pieces on the long 3.5 inch side, they're going to be plenty big enough to get my applique from. The large pieces need to be joined on the short side, which is the 3 inch side, because if you join them on the long side, they're going to be too short. So small pieces join on the long side, large pieces join on the short side. So I'm just going to do that with a 1/4 inch seam as normal, and then we'll be pressing that seam open. And that's just to reduce the bulk. Okay, so now all those are prepared. I've pressed all the seams open and we can move on to working with our templates. Now for this quilt I'm going to be showing you how to do the applique on the machine, but if you are a hand applique person and you're confident with it, then you can most definitely do that. You will need to add your seam allowance to my templates if you're doing applique by hand. Some of the fusible web products that you can get are in sheets that you can put into the printer, which is very handy because if you do that you can run these through, because we're going to be printing 6 of these large templates and 7 of the small ones. If you do run it through the printer, just do a bit of photocopying and set yourself up a page full so that you're not wasting the fusible web in the printer. But I'm going to show you how to do this using this fusible web, which is called steamer seam. This one has double sides, so it has paper on both sides, and you'll find that the glue is stuck to one of the sides. The side of paper that the glue is stuck to is the side that you need to trace onto. Now, one option I've got is to put my templates underneath and trace, and you can use either a light box or put it up against the window to do that. But since we have a lot of the same shape, I thought it would be easier to make myself a template and then trace around it. So that's what I'm going to do. You can use all sorts of things for templates. You can use template plastic, and this is a pack of sheets that I've got here where you can trace onto it with a soft pencil. Or you can just use a piece of fairly thin card. This is a folder, or you can use a cereal box and so on. If you're going to use this technique, you'll want some glue stick, and then you're going to cut out roughly around here, glue it on, and then cut out on the line, and that will be your tracing template. So I'm going to use my plastic, and I just need some good scissors, not my best sewing scissors, to cut these out with. So I've traced my shape onto my template material, and I'm just going to cut, and I want to make my curves as smooth as possible. So I'm going to move, not the scissors, but the template material as I cut. So there's my small one. Let's do the large. And there we go. So I've got the templates, and now I need to mark them up on my fusible web. Some of the fusible webs don't have two sides of paper, they just have the one side, so that doesn't matter. You'll just be tracing onto the paper. So I'm going to put this on here and just run round it with my pencil. So I need 7 of these large pieces. So there's 7 of those, and then we need 6 of the small ones. Six of those. So again, with my paper scissors, I'm just going to roughly cut out and leave myself a little margin outside the drawn line, because I'm going to be cutting on the actual lines in a moment. Okay, so there's my piece. Now, before you take any paper off, just mark both sides of that mid-line onto your steamer seam, and you're going to be using that to line it up with the seam on the fabric. Now, this one's a large one, so I need to get a large set of fabric like this, and I'm going to be sticking this. So I've taken the paper off, I'm going to be putting this on the back, and I'm lining up my midpoint mark with the seam on the fabric. Press this on. I'm going to place my Teflon mat on top of my ironing board, that protects it, then put my applique piece and then fold this over. Now, you can use steam in your iron. You need to make sure that you press it long enough for it to stick well. All the different products vary, so you may need to do a little bit of a test piece with the product that you're using. So now I've got this piece ironed on, I need to cut out on the line that I drew. I'm using my really good Karen K Buckley scissors. You want a pair of scissors that are really sharp right up to the point. These ones are particularly good because they're micro serrated, so they grip the fabric as you cut. I'm going to cut as smooth as we can. Now, once you're ready to put your pieces on, you're going to take the paper off the back. And the easiest way to do that is to get a good strong pin and score the paper, and then peel it from the centre outwards. And that way you won't get fraying on the outside of your pieces. So that now has the sticky on it, and we'll be able to stick it onto our piece. Now you're going to take your background fabric, fold it in half, and then press a little line down the centre. That's going to help to line all the pieces up. Then we need our diagram of which colours go where. So I'm going to start by putting the large pieces on first, stitching around them, and then I'm going to put the small pieces on. So I'm also going to find on this one the centre point, by folding that way and finger pressing. This is the centre of my piece, and this fabric goes in the middle. So if I fold that in half as well, then that gives me the place that I can line it up, and my seam is going to line up on this fold here on my background. So there we go. I just need to get on with all my other pieces and then we'll be ready to do some stitching. Now, to place these other pieces, I'm putting the plastic template that I made onto my background, and then I can use that as a guide for where to position the other pieces that go on here. So I've done that on both sides, and my plainer fabric is at the top for all my long pieces on this one. This is my 8.5 by 12.5 background, so I'm doing block 2B at the moment. Now you can also look, if you look on the left and right, I've left myself plenty of room for my 1/4 inch seams when I sew this block into the quilt. So I don't want to be sewing onto my applique when I do that. Okay, time to get my threads ready. These are the ones that I'm going to use for these colours. And these are my Wonderfill Polyfast threads, but obviously you can use whichever ones you prefer. And these are the ones that we've supplied in the kits. Now I've loaded a bobbin for each of these, but if you don't have enough bobbins, you can try a test piece and see if it'll work with your ordinary thread in the bobbin. But if you have got bobbins, then it's worth loading them up. So now we're ready to applique around these. I've loaded up my bobbin with my thread and I've got my green thread in. I'm going to do them all with their individual colours. So if you haven't done applique before, it's good to have a nice foot with a good open front so you can see where you're going. And I'm going to select a blanket stitch on my machine. I always recommend doing a test piece before you decide on the settings. And the other thing you want to do before you start is to iron on some stabiliser on the back. This is a nice thin stabiliser. It's called tearaway, so when you've finished you can actually tear it away from the stitches. It has an iron-on side. They do make ones that are not iron-on, so you could use that if you wanted to. I just find this very convenient, so we'll be using this one. I'm going to put it on the back of my background. So I've got my little test piece set up here with some stabiliser on the back and a piece of fabric, scrap fabric on top of a background. And you're going to use that to test out your stitch length and stitch width and make sure that everything's working okay. So before we start, I'm going to draw up my thread. So I'm turning the wheel by hand and holding onto the top thread. And as it comes up to the top, I'm now going to tug on that. So I may need some tweezers to get in there and hold both sides of the thread. And pull. There we go. So my bottom thread's up, and what that's going to do is to stop it from all making a nasty little nest on the back. So now I'm going to put the needle down into the background just on the outside of my top fabric. Put my foot down and put my needle down. Now if you've got a needle down function on your machine, you want to do all of this with the needle in the down position so that when you stop the needle will stay down. And at the moment I've got my stitch set so that it's a width of 2.5 millimeters and a length of 2.5, so we'll see how that looks. So we're always trying to keep the outside of the stitch on the background, and then it takes bites over into your top fabric. My machine does forward, left, right for its stitch, and you'll find that your machine has a particular rhythm for its stitch. Forward, left, right. Some of them go forward, back, forwards, back, forward, left, right. It just depends on the machine and what stitch you select. Now when I've come to a corner here, I'm going to turn. We don't have any corners on our first applique, so you won't have to worry about that yet. but I've got my needle down on the outside of the corner, and I've stopped where it took the left and the right stitches, so I know that the next stitch is going to go forwards. So it's going to go forward, left, right. Okay, forward, left, right, and so on. I haven't even used any steamer seam here because I'm just doing a quick test. So now I'm going to raise my needle, pull my thread out. You might have to wobble the manual wheel to get that out far enough, and then cut my thread off like this. And so when you've finished, you just thread these top threads with a needle by hand and poke it through and take it through to the back, and it'll keep everything really neat and tidy. So I'm quite happy with that stitch. I like that stitch length and width. If you want to change it, you can do that. You can go smaller, larger, more length in between the stitches, larger bites into your fabric. But I think that's going to be perfect for the size of piece that we're doing today. And if you don't have a blanket stitch on your machine, you can do a zigzag stitch. So just have a little play and find the stitch that suits you. So if you have the iron-on stabilizer, the way you can tell which is the iron-on side is that that side is very shiny and the other side is dull. So I've ironed that onto the back of my piece, and what that does is it stops your stitches from puckering up as you sew. Okay, so now I'm going to draw up my bottom thread. And I can see that if you saw, when I drew my thread up, the needle moved to the right. So it's good to get a feel for where your needle moves when you're doing appliqué. That means to me that it's on the right hand side of the stitch, so that when I put the needle down, it'll be going into my background, because that's the right hand side of the stitch. So put my foot down and my needle down, and I can just start making my way round slowly. And see how that went forward first. And that's what appliqué with your machine's all about. It's understanding the rhythm of the stitch that you're sewing. Now, we've got a curve on this piece. It's very gentle, but you just want to, every couple of stitches, just maybe raise your foot and readjust. This machine has a function called a pivot, which means that it lifts the foot up when I stop and the needle stays down. That's very handy. Most machines won't have that. So when you're using those machines, you just lift the foot up with your hand, or if you have a knee lift, you can use that. And the reason for using the needle down function is so that you don't get funny jumps when you stop and start. So just working my way gradually around. Don't feel like you have to go fast, and don't be afraid to stop at any point if you feel like you need to stop and readjust. And your whole idea is to try to keep those outside stitches right on the outside of your fabric. If they go on top of the fabric, you'll find that it starts to fray a bit. So you really want your needle on the right to be going down into background, and then taking that bite into the left. So we're getting more of a curve as we come around the top here. And the gentler you can move it around, the more smooth your appliqué is going to look. So you're trying not to move too far in one go. So I'm going to carry on and work myself all the way around to here, and then when I stop, leave myself a thread so that I can thread all of those back with a needle through to the back of the work. And I'm going to do all these 3 before I start putting the small pieces on. So now I've sewn around the large pieces, I can place my small pieces. Just remember that your patterns are in the opposite direction, so my floral fabric is at the top and my plainer fabric is at the bottom. It's slightly overlapping these, but that's fine, and if you wanted to, you could always just trim the sides away very carefully a little bit, just so that they sit next to each other, but I think this is going to look great, and I just have to stitch around this one now. So this is our background for block 2A. It's where we've joined our 2 pieces together. So the overall size of this should be 18.5 inches from this side to this side, and I've made a little mark 1/4 inch in from either end. So just get your ruler and then you can make a little mark there, and the same on the other side, because we don't want to put any applique inside our seam allowances. So I'm going to get my pieces and lay them out. In this block you've got a little less room to fit the pieces in, so when you're cutting, cut inside the line that you drew with your template, and you may have to trim things up just a little. So on this right hand part of the block, we're starting with a yellow, and we've got the floral at the top. And the only way to get these laid out is to just lay them in place and then adjust as we go. Then we've got a green floral that goes at the bottom, and then teal, large one with floral at the top. So you can see that I've pressed this fabric in half so that I've got the line to line up my seams with, and then blue with floral at the bottom. So they look like they're going to fit. Might just scooch this up a little because I'll be putting these on afterwards, these 2 small ones. So I want to make sure the position of the large ones is correct. So that's where my large ones are going to go, and we can iron those in place. And then once they're stitched around, we'll then be putting these on and stitching around them. So I've left just a couple of little threads between the applique and my mark for the seam allowance there. So what I might do is just get my pencil, and I'm just going to take that bit off there and this little bit off here with our scissors, just trying to keep things nice and smooth. Like that. Like that, perfect. So that's going to be that side. I'll take a little bit off this side of this. It's literally just shaving little bits off, and that's just because you get a little bit of error when you're tracing around things. So that's that side all sorted, and then this side we've got the blue first, which is going to go here next to my mark, and then it'll be purple, and then pink, and then orange that way. So this side doesn't look too bad. Trim a little bit off here. Yep, that's looking good. So I'm going to take all the small ones off and then press the large ones in place using my Teflon mat to look after my iron, and then sew round them each with their own thread, and then after that I can put the small ones back on.